Hi and welcome to Grails to Astonish. There's another MCU film coming out in a few weeks, and if you look over my shoulder you can probably guess which one it is. Whenever a comic gets adapted into a movie or show, the question among collectors is always, are the key books for that title going up in value? Today I want to talk about comic book speculation. And when you talk about speculation, what you're really talking about is comics being adapted into movies and shows. There's really no other force that can drive the sudden massive price fluctuations that attract speculation. Now, an experienced and level-headed comic collector will tell you the best way to invest is to buy high-value blue-chip keys and wait. But that's nowhere near as fun as picking up an obscure, forgotten book and watching it suddenly quadruple in price. But speculating on comics is far from a sure thing, and I'm speaking from experience. I've snatched up several books at auctions expecting to cash in on movie releases and watched in frustration as the values remained flat. So, having been burned before and learned a few lessons, I've made a list of the 6 factors that need to be in place for a book to take off in value. And in most cases, you really need all 6 for there to be any chance of serious gain. So let's get into it. Here we go. Is there one single key book? Creating something new is often an iterative process, and a lot of major characters have their introductions diluted by being spread across multiple issues. Yes, Ant-Man first appeared in Tales to Astonish 35, but collectors often point to Tales to Astonish 27 as the key book, because the guy in the suit, Henry Pym, first appeared in that issue before being reworked as a superhero. And muddying the waters even further, Hank Pym wasn't the focus of the Ant-Man movie. That was Scott Lang, who wasn't introduced until Avengers 181 in the 70s. So, if back in 2015 you thought Ant-Man was about to become a big deal because Paul Rudd was playing him in a movie, and you sunk $950 into a mid-grade copy of Ant-Man's first in-costume appearance, well then you were a big dum-dum, because here we are 10 years later and that copy is still worth $950. Collectors have decided this is not the key Ant-Man book. It's the earlier pre-costume issue. But that one didn't go up much either. Collectors couldn't agree on which book is the definitive first appearance, so neither one ever took off. Also, it's Ant-Man. No one really cares that much about Ant-Man. Another good example is Venom. We first saw the symbiote in the form of Spider-Man's new black costume in Amazing Spider-Man 252. But in Marvel chronology, Peter Parker had just returned from Battleworld in Secret Wars, and we didn't learn where the costume came from until Secret Wars number 8, which came out a few months later. But neither of those was the character of Venom as we know him. The symbiote didn't merge with Eddie Brock and become Venom until ASM 300, but that's not really true because he actually cameoed on the last page of ASM 299. So which one is the Venom key? Well, all of them, kinda. So the value of that claim is spread across multiple books. Does the adaptation reflect the character? More often than not, a substantial amount of reworking is required to bring decades-old comic book characters to modern audiences, and what ends up on the screen may have very little to do with the source material. A good example of that is Marvel Superheroes 18, the first appearance of the Guardians of the Galaxy. None of these guys are the Guardians we know from the movies. Yondu is in there, but in a radically different and frankly less interesting form. There's just nothing here aside from the title that made it into the movie, so this book is too disconnected to really benefit from the association. Loads of people bought this issue prior to the movie coming out in 2014, and there were some short-term spikes in value, but ultimately it's pretty much back down to where it was. But another Guardians of the Galaxy key went on a very different trajectory. Tales to Astonish 13 is the first appearance of Groot. The comic is from 1960, predating Fantastic Four number 1. The publisher wasn't even called Marvel at the time, they were still going by Atlas. Groot was retconned into the Marvel Universe decades later, but this comic is actually a hilariously accurate depiction of the character we know from the movies. What are Groot's defining traits? Well, he's a tree, and all he says is, "I am Groot." Check and check. It's hard to pin down what this comic was even worth before the Guardians movie, because it's so incredibly scarce and no one was buying it. There were only 30 graded copies when news broke that Groot would be in the movie, and you probably could have bought any of them for way under $1,000. Today there are almost 600 graded copies, and the handful of high grades have gone for close to 20,000. Tales to Astonish 13 is the perfect storm of comic book speculation. Is the comic already familiar to the general public? The name of the game here is cultural relevance. Is the general public going to know and care about these characters more than they used to? When it's Guardians of the Galaxy, the answer is yes, because they're starting from almost no awareness whatsoever, and even a slight increase is probably going to boost values. But in the case of the Fantastic Four movie coming out, the situation is a little different. There have already been 4 other attempts to bring these characters to the screen, all of which were varying degrees of terrible but still well known, not to mention multiple animated series and a general awareness of the title as classic 1960s Marvel. My point is, the Fantastic Four is already pretty familiar. Another case is the Spider-Man movies Sony puts out every 3 to 5 years. Those do very little to the values of Spider-Man comics because it's almost impossible to raise that character's cultural relevance any higher. Each new movie extends the character's shelf life a bit, but no one expects the comics to go up in value unless there's a specific key issue that the film is based on, and even then, it doesn't do much. Then you've got Iron Man, which is somewhere in the middle. He was a reasonably well-known character prior to the movies, but unfamiliar to anyone who didn't grow up with the comics. Let's call him C-list. The first movie made Tony Stark iconic and moved Iron Man straight to the top of the A-list. For an adaptation to raise the value of a comic in a lasting way, it needs to move the needle substantially on cultural relevance. Is the character on the cover? Doctor Strange got robbed. Strange Tales 110 is his first appearance, but you'd have no idea from the cover because he's not even mentioned on it. Doctor Strange was the B story in Strange Tales. He only got his first little corner of the cover in issue 118, so fans of the character can proudly display 110 as his key issue, but anyone they show it to would have to have the same special knowledge to recognize its significance, and that really hurts the value. The same is true for characters like the Silver Surfer, Thanos, and the Penguin. It does create a certain mystique for those books. If you know, you know. But if you're speculating on a book for that character's debut and they're not actually shown on the cover, there's little doubt it hurts the potential value. And by the way, is that Venom on the cover of ASM 300? I always assumed it was just Peter Parker in the black costume, but the internet seems to think that's Venom. Doesn't look like Venom to me, but what do I know? Is the book rare? This gets back to the fundamentals of the collecting hobby, scarcity and demand. A book isn't valuable just because people like it, and it isn't valuable just because it's rare. There has to be some degree of both things. A great case study in when this goes wrong for speculators is Savage She-Hulk #1. The book came out near the end of the Bronze Age in 1980. It was a first issue with an all-new character. Collectors knew what was up by that point, so they bought up copies, bagged them, and stored them away. As a result, there are hordes of copies in perfect condition. She-Hulk #1 never sold for more than $200 until word of the Disney Plus series hit, and at that time most copies in circulation weren't even graded. When the price spiked overnight to north of $1,500, suddenly everyone sent their copies to CGC to get 9.8 stamped on them. The market was flooded and the price got pushed back down to $200, where it still sits today. You've got to have some degree of scarcity for a book to go up in price and stay there. In contrast, we can go back to Groot. That's an extremely rare book, so the sudden spike in demand could not be met by supply and prices soared. Now for the last and probably most important factor. Is the adaptation any good? This is the one aspect of all the qualities on this list that no one really knows until after the adaptation is released. Probably the 3 books over the last 25 years that have seen and held on to the biggest increases in value are Tales of Suspense 39, the first appearance of Iron Man, Tales to Astonish 13, the first appearance of Groot, and Iron Man 55, the first appearance of both Thanos and Drax. All of those characters were adapted into movies that were of extremely high quality and have stood the test of time. Meanwhile, your Morbius, Kraven, and Madame Web keys have their brief moment of anticipation and then drop back down and get forgotten. So, Fantastic Four #1, is it likely to go up? Well, probably not by much. First of all, the conventional wisdom is to buy on the announcement and sell on the trailer. By the time the movie actually comes out, there's already been a peak and valley in the price, and the only question left is whether it's any good. This 4.0 copy was selling for over $30,000 when Disney announced a Fantastic Four movie was coming, and the most recent sale on Heritage was $12,000. I think the movie will be good, but not, well, fantastic. I think prices will go back up a little bit, and it'll continue to rise steadily in the long term, but it'll be a long time before it gets back to that early buzz / comic bubble peak of 2022. And as for the other key issues relevant to the movie's storyline, we've got the Galactus saga of issue 48, issue 49 with Galactus on the cover, and issue 50 with Silver Surfer. Same deal as issue 1. They spiked a few years ago, have dipped in recent months, and should recover if the response to the movie is positive. Personally, I really hope I'm wrong on that point. I hope we get a jaw-dropping Galactus and Silver Surfer, and it's as epic as the trailer suggests it might be. But I've been burned before, so I don't want to get my hopes up. Looking more broadly, there doesn't seem to be much coming in the next few years for speculators to jump on. Both Marvel and DC have slowed their output considerably and dialed back the introduction of new characters. But there is one book I think still has some steam in it. It's not Fantastic Four #1, it's #5. And it's not because of the movie that's about to come out this summer, it's because of Avengers Doomsday coming out next year. FF5 shares qualities with each of the 3 comics I identified as speculation success stories, and it checks off all 6 boxes on my list. Is there one definitive first appearance? Yes. Does it reflect the character? Yes. Is the character already familiar? A little bit, but not really. Is the character on the cover? Yep, there he is. Is it rare? Super rare. There are actually fewer copies of issue 5 than issue 1. And finally, is the adaptation good? We won't know for a while, but all the pieces are in place. You've got the creative team behind Infinity War and Endgame reassembled, and you've got the Omega-level talent of Robert Downey Jr. playing the role. It could definitely all go wrong, but this is as close to a sure thing as you can get. Dr. Doom is a great character who has never gotten his due in the mainstream. I think he's about to become a much bigger deal. That's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching.